On Monday, the world may learn a lot more about President Trump's allegation that the Obama administration conducted surveillance against him during the presidential campaign.
FBI Director James Comey is scheduled to testify to a Congressional Intelligence Committee. i24 News senior Washington correspondent Dan Raviv recently spoke about Mr. Trump's claims with General Michael Hayden, former director of the National Security Agency.
Number one, the Russians mounted a massive covert influence campaign to affect American electoral processes. My shorthand is they wanted to mess with our heads. And then as it went further on, it wasn't just erosion into our confidence, into our electoral processes. They actually wanted to affect the outcome. I think that's a given. Even the Trump team, belatedly and reluctantly, has agreed to what it is I just told you. The current set of facts is the president tweeting out on a Saturday morning not too long ago that his predecessor had actually authorized wiretapping of him or others at Trump Tower. So where to begin? That's just not possible. All right, now I'm not commenting on the character of President Obama or President Trump. I'm just telling you, Dan, the plumbing doesn't work that way. We took the authority to direct surveillance away from the president in the 1970s, surveillance against an American. And that power now is exclusively in the hands of a court. So what President Trump literally pointed out didn't happen.
No FISA court authorized wiretapping Trump Tower,
right.
The president himself.
Right.
But there must have been at least, I think you call it incidental collection, because Michael Flynn had to quit as head of the National Security Council because of links or connections or ties with the Russians. How were they revealed?
So here's a very important point, all right? A lot of what I'm going to tell you now is going to be new to a lot of people, including a lot of Americans, all right? But it's not new to anybody who knows the business. So it shouldn't shock anyone that Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador to the United States, might occasionally be viewed as a legitimate intelligence target by the United States of America. And when you cover someone like that, Dan, inevitably, he will be in a conversation to, from, or even about what we call a U.S. person, someone protected by our Constitution. The rules say you don't have to stop covering the conversation. You just have to be careful with the U.S. person's privacy. And so what we do is we call minimize the U.S. identity. So routinely, we would say Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak yesterday was in an extended conversation about sanctions with a named U.S. person.
But following what might have happened if, say, Michael Flynn was the U.S. person,
right,
perhaps minimize the name not revealed to all right away, who might have said that it's important that the White House know it's Michael Flynn?
That not just the White House, but the intelligence consumers, right? This is one where it may have been the original judgment of the agency that, now that identity is essential to understanding that intercept.
Because he's close to the president-elect.
Because the meaning of what he might be saying derives from his identity. Dan, in my heart of hearts, if there's any there, and there may not be, if there's any there, it's what I just described for you, which you led in describing as incidental collection. The chair and senior member of the House Intelligence Committee wrote a letter to the appropriate authorities asking if there were any incidental collection implicating Trump Tower and if any of those identities were unmasked. That's where this is going.
Well, that would mean that during the Obama administration, something being said out of Trump Tower may well have been recorded.
Or something being said about Trump Tower. It all applies.
But said by a non-U.S. person.
Absolutely. That the target of the intercept, the surveillance, was someone not protected by the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
The fact that Flynn's name got out into the press and then eventually put pressure on that made him quit or be fired. Do you condemn that leak?
The leaks are leaks, all right? And that intercept, all right, that information is classified. Somebody from my tribe has a real hard time trying to think of any circumstances in which that becomes a good idea.
Okay. You know, it's interesting to the press, maybe to the public, but in the business you were in...
In the business I'm in, no. In the business you're in, we have a different role. You try to discover that kind of information. That's your duty. duty to American security and liberty. My duty to American security and liberty is to keep secret secret.
You spoke about Russia's attempts to affect the U.S. election.
Yeah.
That sounds bigger than anything Vladimir Putin or the FSB, the successor to the KGB, tried in the United States in the past.
Right.
For some reason, 2016, they went big.
They did.
Well, perhaps the Russians actually succeeded. The country is very divided now.
They succeeded beyond all expectations. We've had an incident, a series, I hope a past, of the President of the United States arguing with his own intelligence services. How much better does it get for a Russian covert influence campaign?
What an interview. Our senior Washington correspondent, Dan Raviv, joins us now. Dan, that was terrific. I want to follow up and ask you, did you happen to ask General Hayden if he has any views about these congressional hearings and whether anything might be produced from these hearings, either on Russian influence peddling in the election or on Donald Trump's wiretap claims?
Well, he thinks that it will become more obvious from the Senate Intelligence Committee hearings starting Monday that Russia was going big, as you heard him say to i24 News. Now, as for the president's claim that he was wiretapped, the explanation, according to Hayden, who was in that surveillance game for years and years at the National Security Agency, is that members of the Trump team, who knows, maybe even candidate Trump, were heard in conversations with foreigners, and that's why the NSA or the FBI might have been able to record them, even without any special court ruling or court warrant, to spy on Americans. So he thinks the incidental collection will be the solution to all this that we'll learn next week.
Dan, in that interview, Hayden telling you that with regards to Russian interference in the U.S. elections and dividing the nations, that the Russians succeeded. Those are some pretty big words, right?
As an American, I think it's sad, and he's a professional involved with America's security for decades until his retirement 8 years ago. He thinks the Russians succeeded by dividing this country and eroding confidence. He says Vladimir Putin hates Hillary Clinton. That was part of why the Russians did this, but mainly they are trying to undermine Western democracies in many nations. By the way, he'll be speaking to i24 News again next week when you'll hear him talk about which countries endanger U.S. security. We'll talk about North Korea and China, among other things.
Terrific stuff. Dan Raviv, our senior Washington correspondent. Dan, thank you.
Wow, really strong
Amazing.
interview.
Amazing.
Some major statements out of Hayden there.